Good morning and welcome to the launch of the new RMIT University Centre for Cybersecurity Research and Innovation. Today, I have the pleasure to introduce several experts that will be talking about cybersecurity in a post-COVID-19 world. But first, it gives me great honour to introduce Professor Callum Drummond, AO, Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Research and Innovation, RMIT University.
Thanks very much, Matt, for introducing me. And I have to say, it's a great delight to open RMIT's latest Research and Innovation Centre, the Centre for Cyber Security. But let me begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which we're meeting, and in particular RMIT University acknowledges the people of the Woiwurrung and the Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university. And the RMIT University respectfully acknowledges ancestors and elders past and present, and we also acknowledge the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business. Next slide, please, Michelle. So, a cybersecurity research centre, and what a fabulous addition it is to our research and innovation ecosystem at RMIT. It's the first of its kind in Australia, and it's going to bring together researchers, government and industry leaders to solve pressing cybersecurity challenges, mitigate cyber threats and train a new generation of professionals and cyber ambassadors. Thanks, Michelle. And it's been created in the context of an ecosystem that has 8 enabling capability platforms. So they're thematic foci area for the university, where we can draw capability from any part of the university to capture opportunities or to address challenges. And as we know, we're in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic. So the situation is extraordinary, and RMIT is considering how we can respond to that or those current circumstances. And in particular, we're starting to give thought now, despite the fact that here in Melbourne we're in lockdown, to a post-COVID-19 response. And we're calling these restart initiatives, and we're starting to think about 5 areas that the community may benefit from in terms of university partnering and university engagement. And those 5 areas are a greener start, a fairer start, a better work start, a digital start and a healthier start. And as all of you will appreciate, most of those involve cyber or digital. So having cybersecurity is essential to us moving forward in many of these initiatives that we're considering at the moment. And all these initiatives are underscored by RMIT's focus on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, while we embrace the ethos of Dumba Gurua, which is our commitment to share under our reconciliation agenda with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues. Thanks, Michelle. And the initiatives are led by a consortium of enabling capability platform leaders, many of whom are on this video call today. And because we're in the very fortunate situation of having many people involved in this initiative, I'm not going to go through all the individual names, but you can read a lot faster than what I can state the names, and the names are here on this slide. Thank you, Michelle. So the enabling capability platforms, and in particular the post-COVID-19 research initiatives, will build on the success of our original, what we call ECP activity. They were launched in 2016 And as I said earlier, they're about growing interdisciplinary collaboration both within schools and between schools, and they strengthen our connectivity and our work with external partners from industry, government and community. Just like the Cybersecurity Centre that we're opening today, they have a very external outlook, and it's about establishing interdisciplinary networks driving new research directions and partnerships where we're looking exclusively at the benefit for the world beyond the academic community, whether that's economic, societal or environmental. And these ECPs have made major contributions to our recent successes in ARC Centre of Excellence, ARC training centres, collaboration with national agencies such as DSTG and CSRI. Next slide, please, Michelle. And all this is within the framework of RMIT, focusing on what many people call the pathways to impact. And in the pathways to impact, there's usually 5 elements considered. So you have your inputs, your resources that you put in to begin with. You use those inputs to work on agreed activities, which then generate outputs and outcomes. And hopefully, eventually, those outputs and outcomes lead to impact. Universities generally don't create the impact themselves. It's actually our partners that create the impact. It's our partners that create the new products, the new processes, the new business models, the new services, you know, the new laws, the new regulation, the new policy. It's our partners that create those, not us. So it's really important that if we are to play our role in the delivery of impact, that we understand our role in respect to our partnerships, and we understand how we can contribute to their success. Because when our partners are successful, and when that ultimate delivery comes to fruition, then we're successful. So our definition of success is our partners being successful when we talk about pathways to impact and research translation. Thank you, Michelle. So what are we doing currently? Well, we're bringing together researchers and people from industry and government to debate, discuss and develop partnerships to solve and address issues. We've had multiple workshops, roundtables and events, and these will be held post-COVID-19 restart initiatives to define focus areas and discuss recovery in the future. We are consulting with industry, with partners such as ECP sector expert research advisory groups, and we're creating new support for cross-disciplinary higher degree by research, student research, and to access external interdisciplinary funding with industry nationally and internationally. As well as engaging existing networks, new networks are being established for an agile restart post-COVID-19. And we have supported the establishment of new major centres, as I mentioned earlier, and we've played a role, hopefully supporting Matt in establishing this RMIT Centre for Cybersecurity Research and Innovation, which I said earlier, we are so excited to be launching today. Next slide, please, Michelle. So we're all about shaping the world at RMIT, and our commitment to shaping the world with impactful research has never been more important. Thanks, Matt.
I'd just like to thank you, Callum, for that great introduction. It gives me great honour to introduce Professor Judy Coggin, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, College of Business and Law from here, RMIT University.
Thanks so much, Matt. I'm really pleased to be here today to support the launch of the Centre for Cybersecurity Research and Innovation. RMIT is known for our leading edge research that engages with business and technology, and this centre will complement that mission that Callum has so well described. And what we know from our engagement with industry, including discussions with boards, CEOs, government bodies, and small to medium enterprises, is that cybersecurity is a major priority. And it's no surprise really, as you read about victims of cyber attacks or scams on a regular basis. And for business, these attacks impact their complete operations and put their customers' data at risk. So this centre is distinctive from other endeavours in the field in that it will take a holistic view of cybersecurity, working on the organisation, human and technology perspective. And we are bringing the best researchers from across RMIT to solve current cybersecurity problems facing Australia and the rest of the world, as well as developing solutions for the future. So at the College of Business and Law, we believe that a safe and fair future includes access and security of technology and confidence in the security of data. This centre is the newest part of a research and innovation ecosystem in the college that builds business capabilities, shapes important policy around innovation, and delivers evidence-based thought leadership for organisations and practitioners. The centre complements other business and research focus areas such as our blockchain innovation hub, the Global Business Innovation ECP that builds innovation capabilities of private and public sector firms, RMIT Activator, which provides support to cybersecurity startups, and the Cloud Innovation Centre, who partners with Amazon to solve real cyber issues using cloud-based solutions. So it's a really exciting day for us, and I think that excitement is rippling across RMIT and our community. And we're thrilled to have Professor Matt Warren leading the centre. Back to you, Matt.
Thank you, Judy, for that overview. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Magdalene Pluvinsky, the Director of the Biomedical and Health Innovation ECP from RMIT University.
Thank you, Matt. Next slide, please. I am really delighted to have been asked to step in for Professor Max Sanderson, who is leading the Digital Start initiative for the ECP post-COVID-19 recovery. As you can see, Mark is leading, but there are another 3 directors involved. Julian from Social Change, Larissa from Design and Creative Practice, and myself from Biomedical and Health. And to you, it will be obvious. It's because digital is everywhere. And as well as making sure that we use the technological opportunities that digital offers, we are doing it in a way which leaves nobody behind. And is able to exploit opportunities in innovative ways, not just technically, but also for social change and to support us in times of crisis. And these times of crisis have been massively illustrated recently and still at the moment with the COVID-19 pandemic. So in terms of how we're going to go about taking wisdom from these experiences and using them to move forwards. Next slide, please. 4 priorities have been identified as a focus. They're not meant to be exclusive. They just provide focus. And there's a focus on making sure we learn from COVID-19 recalibration in terms of using the digital for education, for jobs, for cultural and public engagement. Now, in terms of the digital health sector, it has been absolutely massive. And the need to be able to connect health systems and to manage information has been very important. It's actually an opportunity, as well as having highlighted those weaknesses in information systems in health. And again, we do not want to leave anybody behind, and make sure that the training and the opportunities are there for us and for those vulnerable in our societies. And all of this requires fundamentally cybersecurity. So it's, even though it's listed as a fourth priority, it's really woven into all the other priorities as a fundamental measure for the future. So I am also, same as Julie, very excited about the launch of the Cybersecurity Centre and the leadership of Matt Warren taking us into the future. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you so much, Magdalena, for your overview there and your kind words. So we're going to talk now a little bit about the Centre for Cybersecurity Research and Innovation. But before I do that, I just want to make the audience aware that the session is interactive and there's the opportunity for you to post questions. So please use the Q&A function to post questions that you would like the speakers to answer, and at the end of the session we'll have a bit of a discussion based upon the questions that have been posted. So what I'm going to talk about now is a little bit about the centre. So we have several speakers talking about cybersecurity in a post-COVID-19 world. But what, from a cybersecurity situation, has the COVID situation actually shown us? It's shown us a number of things. It's shown us that organizations are able to deploy their staff in a remote working environment. So it means that people are now working from home. They're using Teams, they're using Zooms for their meetings. But it also means that organizational data, instead of sitting on corporate systems, could now potentially be sitting on people's own home computers. And that sort of raises, a whole range of new risks for organizations. We've also seen that the Australian government has requested Australians to download the COVID tracing app, and more than 6 million Australians have done that. But we've also seen security and privacy issues raised about commonly used software systems and packages, such as Zoom, such as TikTok. And we're now seeing governments, talking about social media apps such as TikTok and, the implication around their potential use. During the COVID situation, we've seen that state-based cyber actors are still an issue. We've also seen that the Australian government has responded with a $1.35 billion investment in cybersecurity protection, including a $470 million investment in 500 new cybersecurity jobs for the Australian Signals Directorate. So hopefully they're the jobs that many of our RMIT cybersecurity graduates will be ending up in once they've graduated. We're also now seeing that cyber criminals are targeting Australians in record numbers through a range of COVID-themed scams, online fraud attempts, and deceptive email scams. We've also seen the first economic modelling of the impact of a cyber attack upon Australia. Based upon research from AusCyber, a 4-week digital disruption, a cyber attack, would cost the Australian economy $30 billion and cost the Australian economy 163,000 jobs lost. To put this into context, the 2007 Estonia cyber attack, which is the first recorded cyber attack that we've seen against a nation, lasted 22 days and cost the Estonian economy $57 million of damage. We also are seeing preparation for the release of Australia's new cybersecurity strategy, national cybersecurity strategy. And what will be interesting is to see the impact that the current COVID situation has upon that policy and its future development. Next slide, please. So today is the launch of the RMIT Centre for Cybersecurity Research and Innovation. And thank you all for attending this event. This centre is unique because it's taking research from a multidisciplinary viewpoint. So we're looking at cybersecurity from an organisational, human and technology viewpoint. This multidisciplinary research approach will give new insights to the current and future cybersecurity issues that Australia and the greater world will face. So please contact me if you'd like to receive more information about the centre or you would like to become involved with the centre. Okay, it gives me great pleasure now to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Cameron Boardman, the Interim Director of the Oceania Cyber Security Centre.
Good morning, Matt, and good morning, everybody online. And I echo the congratulations to you, Matt, personally, and to RMIT as a whole, and acknowledge Julian Callum's remarks that this is an extraordinary investment at a time when we are reading constantly the economic and other pressures that the tertiary sector nationally and arguably internationally is faced with. But for RMIT to take such a strong, committed leadership position to invest in this centre to deal with undoubtedly what is one of the most pressing policy and social issues that we are confronted with, I echo everybody's congratulations and wish you all success, Matt. I think it's important to build upon some of the comments you've already made, and in the very brief time I have this morning, I want to give some degree of context around the national policy landscape and certainly talk from a regional perspective as to why the work of what Matt is doing and what all of us as collaborators and contributors potentially to this new centre can achieve. And it's interesting to note that, as Matt has referenced, that on the 19th of June, when the Prime Minister said that Australian organisations are currently being targeted by a sophisticated state-based cyber actor, and he said quite clearly, which was quite an extraordinary comment, that we know that it is a sophisticated state-backed cyber actor because of the scale and the nature and the targeting and the tradecraft used. And it's the first time I think we've actually heard a national leader talk about this threat, not just in a contextualised policy, but in a real world example. And the fact that the Prime Minister was advising Australians to patch their computers, to make sure that they have the necessary security precautions to ensure that they can protect themselves so we can prevent some of these activities from occurring as best as possible, was an amazing step. But as Matt has talked about through the $1.35 billion investment, what's quite noticeable is that $31 million of that will be enhancing the ASD's capabilities to disrupt cyber crime offshore. And that's where I want to talk about from where we are currently from the Oceania Cybersecurity Centre. And if I could just kick off, Michelle, with the next slide to just give a broader context of us. So we were set up in 2015 before the National Cyber Strategy, before we thought there was a collaborative, and the next slide please, Michelle, a collaborative response to some of the research activities that were being undertaken. But we were dealing with issues that were unknown at that stage. And what we have discovered, which is something that Callum has remarked upon, is that unless we are approaching our research from an evidence-based perspective, and we are identifying those problems in a first world, first example type of scenario, there's not much point in us investing research to deal with them. We are dealing with constant evolving threats and constant unknowns. If I could go to the next slide, please, Michelle. So to date, and this is where it gets quite confusing around what's actually happening in this environment nationally. And I'm sure many people on this call would have seen Patrick Fair and his Australian Cybersecurity Online Safety Instructional Chart. And Patrick, if you're online, I commend you on the great work you've done in trying to dissect and decipher the Australian national security ecosystem. But you would see that there is an enormous amount of activity coming on, but one thing that's not occurring is the leadership and the coordination. And it's not a criticism, it's just an observation that there are many things that we could do a whole lot more effectively if we did have that coordination, that leadership, and we were putting a framework of evidence first. So some of the things that we've done is tried to look at these threats from an evidence-first basis to do a proof of concept on some aspects that universities are currently dealing with, to then look at the next step on how these can be contextualised and applied in a real-world scenario. And I'm very pleased that a number of the proof of concept and some of the industry projects that we're currently undertaking, RMIT is a critical and a very supportive and strong partner to these activities. If I could go to the next slide, please, Michelle. But that's very much what we're focusing on domestically, but what's happening regionally and offshore is probably of more noteworthiness, considering some of the statements that the Prime Minister has made. So there is a model called the Cybersecurity Maturity Model for Nations, which was something that actually came out of the 2010 United Kingdom cybersecurity, their first cybersecurity strategy, when they observed that there was a number of cyber attacks. There was an enhanced level of criminal cyber activity emanating predominantly from Eastern Europe and Sub-Saharan African organised criminal gangs, that they needed to do something to try and address this. And so in partnership with Oxford University, they developed this model, which was a first responder type of approach, where the University of Oxford would go into a country and they would conduct a whole of economy review of cyber resilience, of cyber maturity, of cyber capability, to identify those gaps, to identify those vulnerabilities, and to provide recommendations for a pathway to try and address those aspects. And when we were set up in 2015, we were given the task of looking at this in a regional context, particularly in the Pacific, to sort of see how those threats would evolve and what potential threats they would provide to the Australian national security landscape. And to date, we've completed 6 of such projects from Samoa, Tonga, Kiribati, PNG, FSM, the Federated States of Micronesia, and Vanuatu. And I'm going to talk about this model and the evidence from the data and what it actually leads to and how it can be utilised for further research, particularly through Matt Centre and through everybody that's on the call. But there's no point, if I could go to the next slide, please, Michelle. There's no point just doing a review to identify problems unless you're actually doing something with it. And this is where we are really in an interesting opportunity Australia-wide and particularly in the Pacific. Because in the Pacific, we have invested as a country billions of dollars in trying to develop some of the best submarine technology and infrastructure cabling that exists anywhere in the world. So our Pacific neighbours have extraordinary technology and internet capabilities, but what actually happens on the ground that potentially leads to their vulnerabilities and may, in fact, lead to some of these threats that currently Australia is faced with. So when we do a review, the model is quite simple. As we go in there, we will identify under the 5 dimensions that I'll talk about in a moment. We'll provide a report to the government, and we will work with the government to identify solutions on how they can address some of these threats. They can further improve their cyber maturity, and they can develop a much more responsive and resilient platform. And the very first project that we've done in this regard is with the government of the Republic of Vanuatu to do 2 things: to identify what their critical national infrastructure is, i.e. what's under threat, what needs to be protected, what protocols, processes they need in place in order to have a much more mature and resilient posture. And then to take the evidence and take the research and the information that that project leads to develop a comprehensive national cybersecurity strategy. And it's interesting when you look at Australia is that we only had our first strategy only maybe 3.5 years ago, and we're now in the process of waiting quite anxiously on what the new strategy will entail. But for many of these nations on our doorstep, they are nowhere near as developed as what we are. They don't have strategies, they don't have coordination, their skills are probably vulnerable, but you take that on board with the connectivity, the infrastructure they have, and the potential for other actors to build onshore infrastructure, then you do almost have a melting pot of vulnerability. If I could go to the next slide, please, Michelle. So this is what the big picture is, and there's only one point that I want to raise or emphasise, I should say, on this slide. The weaknesses that could potentially be exploited in some of our neighbouring nations and some of their supply chains undoubtedly is going to impact upon the safety and the economic prosperity of not just Australia, not just their own countries, but the region and all of those digitally interconnected countries globally. And this is where we come in, is because when we have an internet that is absolutely global and you have onshore and offshore infrastructure that has extraordinary connectivity capabilities, there has to be a matching and a balance between what's happening onshore to enable these networks to be used safely and securely, and not to provide further vulnerabilities to any other nation that is connected. The next slide, please, Michelle. So I go back to Patrick Fair's chart, and we look at it from the basis that under the Australian context at the moment, there is currently 13 ministers, including the Prime Minister. There is 12 departments, and as best count, there are 36 agencies. In addition to many other organisations that have some coverage and some role and some responsiveness in cybersecurity from a policy and a technology perspective in Australia. It's not exactly what we would call a coordinated response. So in order to build the resilience and the framework that we need to better protect Australia and better protect our nations offshore, we do need to have the commitment from our leaders, we do need to have the efforts coordinated, and we do need to have that evidence first, that contextualisation from the local needs in order to address these problems firsthand. If I could go to the next slide, please, Michelle. So this is where we come in from the evidence-based approach, and this is what the CMM model actually does result in. The 5 dimensions around cybersecurity policy and strategy, evaluating cyber culture and society, looking at education, training and skills, the legal and the regulatory frameworks and the standards organisational technologies, it is as holistic as you can get. We go into a country, we take researchers from our member universities, including RMIT. We work with organisations such as the World Bank, such as the International Telecommunications Union, such as APNIC, the Asia Pacific Information Network Centres, and other governments such as New Zealand, the UK and the US. And we work with these countries to develop a holistic response across these 5 dimensions to really get a picture of what those gaps are, what the problems are, and develop the pathway on how we can improve the posture, arguably to make a much more safer regional position. And some of the sub frameworks around what skills and trainings, the reporting mechanisms, the ability for these countries to respond to incidents, their crisis management techniques, their reporting, their access to consistent and coordinated standards are some of the themes that we explore with the nations to really look at how we can improve their posture. But in a more practical sense, it really doesn't matter that we can provide recommendations and we can provide a pathway unless we're actually doing something about it. And as I said with our Vanuatu project, it's the first time in this region that we've taken this evidence-based approach and that we've developed a clear pathway to try and develop a strategic response that is going to be to the benefit of the nation and the region as a whole. So I go to the next slide, please, Michelle. So there has been globally over 80 of these reviews completed. As you can see that we are very active in the Pacific and we are looking to work with some of our ASEAN and Southeast Asian neighbours to do this. And this provides a global context of emerging threats of policy and legislative and other limitations, and where we can get consistency of approach so we can build a global response that then shapes a regional response that then targets and shapes a national response. And working with our partners at the Oxford University, the Oxford Martin School, U38, the University of South Africa, and the 8 member universities of the Oceania Cybersecurity Centre, including RMIT, the extraordinary data, the research, the evidence, the knowledge that can stem from these reports will give us the basis to further develop, enhance and provide those systematic and holistic frameworks and responses that Callum, Julie, Matt have spoken about this morning. The next slide, please, Michelle. And just to conclude is that one of the evaluations that's come out of this, which goes back to the comment I was making about perhaps the lack of collaboration and coordination from the Australian government currently, is that by going through this approach, undoubtedly it leads to greater collaboration and coordination from government. It is an important part that unless we are working with all strains of government at every single level to look at these problems holistically, then we're really doing ourselves a significant disservice. And my final slide, please, Michelle, just reiterates that approach around evidence-based being the first point of response. We welcome the opportunity to work with everybody on this call and Matt's centre and his team of exceptionally qualified researchers to do this from Australia, so that we can look at the next cyber security strategy, we can have a much more coordinated approach, we can develop the evidence, we can identify the gaps and problems, and we can use that as the basis to roll out regionally to have a much more focused and a better and safer and secure Australia. It's an extraordinary opportunity for us to take this data, to leverage from the capability that we have to work with Matt and his team, and I'm delighted to be invited this morning, and congratulations to you, Matt. Good luck, and I really look forward to working with you in the future. Well done.
Thank you so much, Cameron, for your presentations and kind words. And really, from my perspective, what's amazing is the role that Australia has through the Oceania Cybersecurity Centre, in terms of helping our neighbours in the South Pacific. And that's always one of the things that we should consider, when we talk about the cybersecurity, is that it is this international dimension. And the Oceania Cybersecurity Centre is doing sterling service on behalf of Australia, to help our neighbours in the South Pacific. So just to remind you about the Q&A question, so if you'd like to answer any questions, if you'd like to ask any questions to the panel members, please don't forget there's the Q&A function, which you can use to post those questions, and the panel will get to those at the end. So our next speaker is Sam Pritchard, who's the Director of Cyber Risk based here in Melbourne for EY.
Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate the intro, and thank you for the opportunity to talk today. So, firstly, thanks, Michelle. Firstly, I'd like to share some details from this year's EY Global Information Security Survey. As I think that with COVID-19 and where we're at now, we're looking at a post-COVID-19, but we're very much in the middle of a second wave of COVID-19 now. And everything that we've learnt previously is relevant through the first wave, is relevant to what we're doing now. So firstly, the cyber and privacy threat is increasing and expanding. 59% of organisations have faced a material or significant incident in the past 12 months. About 21% of these attacks came from hacktivists, which is tech-enabled political and social activists, second only to organised crime groups, which was at 23%. Cybersecurity spending is driven by defensive priorities rather than innovation and transformation, which makes this initiative so important. 77% of new initiative spending focuses on risk or compliance rather than new opportunity. Security spending does not yield the expected results. While security operations such as threat detection and response is the single largest category in terms of spend of dollars and FTE, the Internal Security Operations Centre only detects 26% of breaches. The security function struggles to speak in business terms. So only 25% of respondents from the survey say that they can quantify in financial terms the effectiveness of their cybersecurity spending in addressing the risk faced by the business. So what does this mean? There is a significant opportunity for security officers, boards, C-suites, vice chancellors groups, and the business to work together to reposition the cybersecurity function, integrating cybersecurity into business processes using a security by design approach. Organisations that succeed can enable cybersecurity function to become a key agent of change, enabling the transformation their businesses must undergo to remain competitive. This all becomes more important post-COVID-19. Can we move to the next slide, please, Michelle? Thank you. Disruptive forces and trends in digital education shaping the future of higher ed start with a changing workforce. Technology disruption is affecting the nature of employment and employability. As workforces change, so does the education that aims to equip students for the modern workplace. Global rankings, international mobility, and global knowledge hubs will change the competitive landscape of international competition, which opens up new opportunities for learning. Student internationalisation will become the new norm for education as political and demographic occur. Digital behaviour is evolving as digitalisation is empowering learners. As nearly every consumer activity shifts to the digital realms of web, mobile, social, mixed reality, and virtual reality, digital natives are developing new, radically different learning behaviours and expectations. Non-traditional market entrants are blurring the industry boundaries and disrupting the industry. Technology is driving convergence in almost every industry. For universities, convergence heralds competitive threats from new entrants with disruptive business models. It also offers the opportunity to collaborate on research and innovation, curriculum design, and work placements. And finally, portfolio careers and the need for workforce agility in the gig economy are increasing the demand for continuous development, requiring learning that is self-directed, affordable, accessible, and time-critical. Next slide, please, Michelle. The evolving threat landscape, number one. So threat actors are of all types exploiting the uncertainty and publicity of the pandemic. Cyber threat actors across the spectrum, from government-backed groups to organised crime gangs, are using the public's fear, uncertainty, and curiosity about the pandemic to adapt their threat vectors, tactics, and targeting strategies. There has been an increase in the number of phishing, malicious sites, business email compromise attempts linked to the pandemic, appearing as fraudulent news updates, precautionary guidance, virus maps, lab results, or employer memos. Cyber defences are not tuned for dispersion of activities and processes, so working remotely has changed the network baseline. And user activity that cyber defences have been tuned for, such as all traffic appearing irregular to existing cyber defences until a new security baseline is established. And remotely performing high privileged actions could trigger alarms. 2, protecting our people and our organisation. So effectively managing cyber risks of working remotely at scale, we must remember what I believe is the key ingredients. It's our people. Protecting employees and sensitive information is as much about how you communicate with your people as it is about the technology capabilities deployed. Communicating risk to staff is absolutely critical as a first line of defence. Enterprises that monitor or restrict certain activities, such as high privileged activities, like account creation, deletion, security setting modifications to on-premise systems, are forced to adapt procedures and enable remote administration. This new remote traffic changes the network baseline, requiring tuning of advanced security analytics. Maintaining well-being. It's so important to apply a people-first mindset and communicate regularly with your teams, both from a work and a wellness point of view, such as dealing with challenges, mental health, and wellbeing extras. So how does this work practically? So for example, look at your calendar, identify meetings where you can do a walk and talk meeting. I did this yesterday with a New Zealand colleague. Yes, I got up at 7 a.m. and it was very cold, it was about 3 degrees. But I could go for a walk. It was a great day to start. And I did my meeting, my first half an hour meeting on the phone, doing some exercise. And I felt that really set me up for the day. 3, critical workforce resilience. To quote Gartner, a pandemic can result in possible staff absenteeism exceeding 40% for extended and sequential periods. Contingency planning for your cybersecurity workforce is critical to cater for the unique pandemic disruption events. Putting pressure on an organisation's ability to maintain secure operations, communication, productivity, and resumption to the new normal of business operations. Impacts on personnel cannot be overstated. Periods of illnesses may come in waves anywhere from 3 to 12 months apart, which could result in a significant percentage of your staff being impacted, either being ill themselves or caring for family members. This may result in limited resources available to operate your critical cybersecurity functions. This includes third-party staff, such as those in an outsourced security operations centre. And number 4, how do we prepare to respond to a significant cyber incident during and post a pandemic? Well, from the Global Risk Survey 2020, 79% of board members admit that their organisations are ill prepared to deal with a crisis. And from the EY Global Information Security this year, 9% of new or increased business funding was aligned to a crisis. A key tenet of enabling cyber resiliency is ensuring that you're prepared to detect and respond to security events no matter the circumstance. Developing robust plans can provide your organisation with the confidence that you are prepared to manage a security incident despite the shift in BAU working arrangements. Key considerations when planning a response to a significant cyber incident include defining the guiding principles to be followed during an incident that will help respond to make consistent decisions. These could include: don't make impulsive decisions, help ensure information is accurate, concise and timely, and minimise governance processes and process turnaround times, i.e. consider delegations of authority. Identify the core team responsible for managing the incident response, develop a communication plan, use a checklist to ensure that the minimum steps have been completed when initiating a critical response. If we could move to the final slide, please, Michelle. To summarise as we work through the now, the next and the beyond of COVID-19, the now: allocate cyber resources to support the business in enabling telenetworking. We've moved back to that again now through the second wave. Take a measured approach. Don't panic, and use an appropriate framework such as the NIST cybersecurity framework, or for example, we have one ourselves at EY Cyber Program Assessment, to assess your foundation to efficiently secure existing assets. There will already be controls in place. The key is to risk assess the gaps and take an appropriate risk-based approach to the actions. The next, start planning for the future, combining enablement, I'll get the word out, of remote working, cost control dependence on third-party sourcing. Reassess and realign your cybersecurity strategy and roadmap to mitigate your key risks. And finally, the beyond, operating in a new normal, a transformed cyber function optimized to enable a new business reality. So realigning your cybersecurity strategy and roadmap. Cybersecurity as a business advisor and a transformation enabler. In a post-COVID world where funding is limited and focus is on critical spend only, it's more important than ever to focus security spend on the priority areas to enable value for money to mitigate your key cyber risk. Thank you. I hope this has been informative. There is a paper available, which I think can be shared, but if you would like to reach out to me, you're welcome to. Back to you, Matt, and thank you again and congratulations on this event and the launch.
Thank you so much, Sam. It's wonderful to get the information from an international context, and also the experiences of such a large organisation such as EY has in that cyber space. So thank you so much for sharing that. Now, just to remind everyone, I see that lots of people are posting questions in the Q&A session. Please keep that going. So I'm looking forward to the Q&A session at the end. I'd like to introduce, gives me great honour to introduce Susie Jones, the co-founder and CEO of Cinch Security.
Thank you so much, Matt, and congratulations. Your leadership and your vision has finally come to life, and I'm very, very proud that Cinch is able to be part of your event today. Next slide, please, Michelle. Now, whilst I don't have quite the same recognition of our brand as many of the others on the call, I might actually just take a moment to introduce Cinch and why it is that I'm here talking about small businesses alongside the likes of EY and the OCSC. Next slide, please. So Cinch was established back in 2018, but myself and Adam, my co-founder, have been working with small businesses on cybersecurity challenges for the last 3 to 4 years. Our focus is solely on small businesses. And when we talk small businesses, we're talking the likes of your lawyers, your accountants, your mortgage brokers, your doctors, your physios, those businesses with fewer than 20 employees. And there are over 2 million of those businesses here in Australia, which when you think about a population of what, 26 million, it's a really significant percentage of our population actually work within small businesses. And we talk about, rather than cybersecurity, we talk about cyber fitness, because for businesses where they have no time, they have very small budgets and they have limited expertise, it's about gradual improvement over time. It's about building in the right behaviours and the right routines into their everyday work life and gradually building up that strength and resilience over time. Our business in the last 2 years is now grown to have 200 businesses working with us on our platform. And I might just take a moment before I move on to my slides. I might just take a moment to comment on what Matt and Cameron and Sam have said before me. At the start, Matt spoke about the quick switch that businesses across Australia had to make to remote working at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. And we certainly saw that with small businesses. The difference for small businesses, for many of them, is they pick up their laptop, they go home and they turn it back on again, and that's done. They had to make very quick decisions with very limited information, far more limited than what you have in any large enterprise. And they also don't have the same skills and expertise when it comes to making risk decisions. They don't necessarily have the same access to quality information to make those decisions. They just needed to keep their businesses running. And this meant that the noise around using Zoom and TikTok is very unhelpful, because there's lots of conversations saying that they're insecure. It's not many conversations saying what they should be using instead. And so our approach when it comes to cybersecurity and cyber fitness for small businesses, we don't tell them about a problem unless we tell them how to solve it as well. We've certainly seen the number of scams on the rise, as Matt mentioned. In the last 4 to 5 months, ScamWatch have recorded over 3,300 scams targeting Australians. Certainly small businesses have been hammered. Every small business owner that we speak to talks about the number of new phishing attempts that are hitting their inboxes. And this is causing a great amount of confusion and concern for small business owners. And again, with very limited solutions being presented to them. Cameron spoke earlier about the 19th of June announcement or press conference by the Prime Minister, which was completely extraordinary in our lifetimes for a Prime Minister to do so. What is interesting is that amongst small business owners, that had very little by way of direct effect. It didn't start conversations amongst many small business owners. It didn't make them go, oh, what am I doing? Until the news and the media started to think about what did this mean for small businesses. And it's also interesting that the $1.3 billion expenditure that has been announced has virtually nothing in it that will directly support and help the 2 million small businesses across Australia. We're hoping that in the second half that is announced in greater detail, and indeed in the strategy that we've been waiting for, that more direct support will be available for the 2 million small businesses across the country. There were comments that Cameron made about how large businesses have strategies, they have a great amount of support, they have significant risks and risk management processes. Small businesses, by and large, don't have any of that. They have a decision in front of them. If they're given a good reason to do something, they do it, and then they move on. And it's one of the wonderful things about working with small businesses is that they can actually make very quick decisions and changes very fast, but only when they're presented with the right information in a way that they can understand it. There was also comments around our nation's supply chains in comparison to those across the Pacific. I would say, I would respectfully disagree to say that our supply chains are much stronger than those across the Pacific, because small businesses are not supported. And if any of our large supply chains do have small businesses included, then they are potentially very vulnerable. And lastly, there with Sam, you spoke about cybersecurity spend being driven by certain factors within large corporates. What we see within small businesses is that a vast majority of small businesses spend less than $500 a year on cybersecurity. And when it comes down to spending more, largely the drivers behind them are fear of the unknown, fear of the discomfort that they have that they're not doing enough, and as well as regulatory or compliance pressures. So we are hoping that as more industry bodies and associations start to ramp up their advice for each industry, that will translate to more action amongst small businesses. Next slide there, please. Now, what we found at the beginning of the COVID-19